Hello, friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I get to talk to other writers. So it's a pretty good gig. I talk to a lot of fascinating people. I'm very grateful for all of my conversations, and over 100 at this point. And so let's keep it going for a little while longer. Why not? First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. We are working on finalizing dates for my next Gentle Novelist Retreat, but I think we're going to have 2 offerings next year, most likely in Colorado. So make sure to check my website, carterwilson.com, to check out when we launch those dates. And I'm also offering coaching and mentoring services. I do one-on-one coaching. I can do everything from where I work with clients from developmental editing, social media recommendations, accountability partner, and finding your why as a writer. All aspects of writing I do coaching on. So if that's something that's interesting to you, I'm available for a free 15-minute phone consultation. You can just email me at me@carterwilson.com or just go to my website. You can see my range of services offered there. And yeah, we'll set up a time to chat and see if coaching and mentoring is something that might be a good fit for both of us. So on with the show today. Today, I talked to the hugely talented Kathleen Willett. So Kathleen, she was fantastic to talk to. Kathleen is the author of 2 books. Her most recent book, launching a week from now, but it'll be out by the time this comes out on November 14th, is Anything for a Friend, a thriller. And she is with Lake Union Publishing. And her first book, Mother of All Secrets, was also Lake Union book. And it's crazy. You go to these Amazon published books, and this one even has more than usual. She's got like 10,000 reviews on this, but the power of having a book published by the behemoth that is Amazon and having the ability to push that book to their readers is impressive. So she's had great success with Lake Union and especially with her first book. And she's got an interesting story. She's an English teacher. She studied English. But it's just one of those things where, like, I've always wanted to write, and I actually have a really good idea for a book. Let me see if I can do it. And we kind of got into the detail of, almost the shame of being a writer. She was talking about how she was writing snippets of scenes on her phone because it was a secure, hidden place that nobody could see, and she didn't really want to tell anybody that she was writing, with the exception of her husband. And I know exactly what that feels like, because you feel like a fraud. You feel like an imposter. What right do I have to be penning a novel? I don't know what I'm doing. And then, after a while you realize nobody really knows what they're doing. And that's what makes it all easier. But she's got a lot of great advice for aspiring writers. She's gone through her own trials and tribulations, finding an agent or having books that ended up not going anywhere. So they're your practice books, but all the things that novelists go to for sure on their path to publication. So a lot of good nuggets in there. She was fantastic to talk to, and I'm really looking forward to meeting her next year at Thriller Fest. So there you go. This is my conversation with Kathleen Willett.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
It's nice to meet you. And I guess we have one thing in common. We share the same, I think we share the same PR agency.
Yes.
K Publicity. That's who reached out to me. So what is this is your second book that you have coming out. What are your thoughts about PR agencies? Was that something with like your first book? You're like, I definitely want to have my own outside PR agency as well.
I didn't do it for my first book. I'm
Okay.
still really feeling it out. Yeah. With my first book, I sort of wanted to see what it was like without that, and then determine if it felt like there was a need for it. So I did make a lot of like very, I don't know, like I feel like I come across as very awkward anyway. So on social media, I was like reaching out to people like, hey, I hope it's okay, that I'm reaching out. I already followed a lot of bookstagrammers before writing anything of my own, but so I did a lot of that on my own, and I was also super lucky with my first book because it was like an Amazon first reads
Yeah,
selection.
that
So
that that makes an impact.
yeah, definitely. And that kind of maybe made the need for outside publicity a little bit less, but
Yeah,
it's been super helpful having K Publicity. Yeah, they're awesome and
totally.
it's like so
Yeah.
creative and yeah.
I with even starting with my first book. So I'm book number 9 comes out next April. Every single book I've hired my own PR firm. And as you get with bigger and bigger publishers, maybe the need becomes less, but again, they work well together. And then one PR agency might have a much better way of identifying, say, influencers than maybe the in-house PR firm or team. So I don't know. And you can't measure it. You can't say, because I
Right.
hired this, that resulted in X number of sales. With very rare exceptions of like, Facebook ads, stuff like that, where you can measure. But I've always had the attitude of like, let me just give this book the best chance of success that I can. And then just let go and see and see what happens. So I've been with Kay now for maybe 5 books now, 4 or 5
Okay.
books. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I think that's a great way to think of it. Like just if you can do it, why not?
yeah. I don't say it flippantly. I know it's
Yeah.
expensive and
Yeah.
not everybody can afford it, but if you can, I think it's probably something worth pursuing. So you're in Manhattan.
Yes, I'm in New York City. Yep.
How long have you lived there for?
Oh my gosh, let me do some backwards math. How old am I? Okay, I've lived here for like 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of life is that like? So I go to Manhattan usually just for Thriller Fest. I used to go a little bit more often. And it's always, I love it, but it's always, for a Colorado person, it's pretty overwhelming quickly.
I totally get that. And I went to Thriller Fest last year as well. And I had this conversation with several authors because I feel like everyone I met who I was like, oh, yeah, I just live 2 miles away. They were like,
Yeah,
you live here in this
right.
godforsaken place? But Thriller Fest, to be fair, is in Times Square, which is like
Times Square is
a
a shit
very,
show. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like the most intense, like, cauldron of New York.
Yeah.
So the neighborhood where I live is like a little bit more residential. It's super family friendly. There's like, you're sandwiched between parks. There's a lot of trees. So it doesn't have that overwhelming feel of Times Square. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like living in Manhattan. I don't really like driving very much. So it saves me from having to do that. I have 2 young kids. So there's like so many activities all the time for us
Yeah.
to do and
That's
keep
awesome.
busy. So yeah, so far so good.
I feel like as I get older, now my kids are both in college, so I'm an empty nester, and I've almost daily a growing desire to like be further away from people. And
I totally get that.
I don't know what that, I mean, is. I don't feel like a curmudgeon, but like maybe that's just what happens when you get into your 50s. You're just like, I've seen enough.
My husband and I do sometimes have that conversation of like, we should just move to, like Colorado actually
Mhm.
comes up a lot, or like move to Vermont,
We've
like
been
live
talking about
off the
Vermont.
land. Like, oh, really?
Absolutely. Yeah.
um,
But who knows? It's
yeah, no.
even Colorado's gotten, I mean, then now this sounds very curmudgeonly, but even Colorado's gotten busy, and you start driving around and like, I just hate people.
Well, you'd be in good company in New York, honestly, because I think most New Yorkers really hate people too, even though they're surrounded by so many of them.
Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey. Yeah, so
Okay,
pretty
so
close to New York.
not
And
very
yeah,
far. What was
yeah.
what were you doing as a kid? Like, were you exhibiting writerly creativity, or were you just a goofball?
Probably both. Yeah, I definitely have always been super into reading. Both my parents like love to read. And I grew up reading R.L. Stein and Mary
Mm,
Higgins Clark. Mary Higgins Clark is actually from the town I grew up in. So many of her books are like set in the North Jersey area,
hmm.
which made reading those books even more fun because it was like the kidnapping story was like, oh, the kid was kidnapped from like the town pool that,
Right,
I went to and stuff.
right,
Yeah, so I loved reading and definitely wrote some like very terrible, kid stories that just
right.
had
Kid
no
fan fiction.
arc whatsoever. Yeah, exactly. Um, my parents would occasionally, if they wanted me to read a specific book, because they thought it was like, just a classic book that everyone should read or something. And if I resisted, they would like, I don't want to say bribe, but it was basically bribe. They would reward me with cash if I finished this book and like prove to them that I had finished it. So
Wow.
I'm not like condoning bribing, but I think if you're gonna bribe your kid, like bribing them to read a great book is a good use of that.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
How old are your kids now?
They're 6 and 4.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I always think about when I'm talking to guests, about, those of us who grew up without smartphones, like, would we have become writers had our days been consumed with looking at our smartphones rather than reading or some kind of creative escapism? And so, like, I feel like your kids are getting to that cusp of like really get them to read, because the benefits obviously are tremendous, whether you become a writer or not.
Yeah, that's such an interesting and kind of scary question of like how different lives could be if,
Yeah, but
yeah.
because there's this through line from all my guests of like, there's a preponderance for sure, of guests who say, you know, I was lonely, or we moved around all the time because I was an army brat. Books were my escape. Books were the only thing that I had. And I'm like, well, what if you had the internet?
Right.
Well, maybe you would have been a writer, but yeah, you wonder about that.
Yeah.
Um, and as you were going through school and all that kind of, were you thinking like, I want to do something on the art side of the equation, or had you even given that thought?
I hadn't thought much about that. So I majored in English and became an English teacher. I'm still a high school English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank you for your
like,
service, by the way,
oh,
especially high school. Good Lord. That's Purple Heart kind of
um,
stuff.
well, everyone always says that. I feel like I could never teach elementary school. Like high school students they're so self-sufficient. It's not like I don't know. I feel like elementary school, but maybe everyone always thinks that whatever grade they're not teaching is harder. I feel like it's sort of the opposite of the grass is always greener, but
Yeah.
like I don't think I could teach you. I so admire the teachers who are like with young kids all day.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, so I feel like from like sometime in college, I was like, I love talking about books. I think I like being around, this age group. So I did that, and I really never thought about writing myself
I mean, is
until
that the most common progression for an English major, is to teach?
I mean, it's probably, I know there's always this discussion with English majors of like, well, where is that going? And I
What are you
don't
going to do
really
with it?
know.
Well,
Right,
you're going to go to
exactly.
graduate school and do something
Yeah.
else.
But yet there are so many jobs that rely so heavily on writing. So I think it's like very translatable into so many other skills and fields. But it doesn't have that clear path forward the way that other majors do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, you're right, because so I was basically a business major and I worked in the business world for decades, and you don't appreciate how critical written communication is, whether it's an email or whether it's a formal presentation. And you also don't appreciate how few people can do it. Like, it's crazy. Like, for me, it was just like I had to write these real estate appraisal reports, but it was really difficult, because I didn't take any English classes in college. And you just learn over time, but so many people are just like, they don't know how to structure a sentence properly, and it's kind of mind-blowing a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is like a super important thing for everyone to be able to do, which I'm constantly reminding my students. And I mean, those conversations will continue to evolve with like Chat GPT and stuff. Like there's now so much that AI can do for us, but it's like you want to be able to do it too, and
Right.
then use AI in situations where it could save you time. You don't want AI to be able to do things that you're not capable of doing.
Right.
I think there's like an important difference.
Yeah. And I kind of like, I shy away from AI a lot because I feel I guess, threatened a little bit by it. But it's, somebody will tell me like, oh, I just needed to do a proposal to a client. So I had AI do a first draft. I'm like, I can't even think that I would do that because I like the challenge of organizing my own thoughts. And it just, but it's a massive tool for those people who struggle with that. So
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's fantastic, but it is a bit worrisome, especially when you can Google to see if your book has been included in the list of books that AI is using to write other books.
Was yours on that big list?
3 of mine were.
Wow.
Yeah, there's something like 400,000 books on that list or something like that. Was yours? Did you Google your?
It was not. And
were you offended?
Exactly. It's like 90% relief, 10% totally offended.
You're like, what's wrong with my book?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like,
I know. I had that too. I'm like, not all of mine, just some of mine. Those aren't even my good ones. I know. It is scary. So you get your English degree. You know that you like books. But then you went on to graduate school, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you basically have to have a master's to teach. I worked in like advertising for 2 years after college and then went to graduate school for teaching. And then, I worked at one big public school in Manhattan for 10 years. Took a couple years off recently, sort of a mix of like COVID and having my second baby. And now I'm back teaching at a different school. It's an all-girls Catholic school. So yeah, definitely different scene, but so far so good.
And were you, throughout all this time, you had this kind of unearthed passion to be a writer or to write something. Had you played around with that, or was it not until your first book that you gave it a serious go?
It really wasn't until I had a baby, and it was like, I've read thrillers voraciously. That's always been my preferred genre. And then I just had a really specific idea for a book, and I could like see the whole plot in my head. And I kept having like scenes in my mind as well, just like really like detailed conversations. And then COVID happened and I left teaching. And I think COVID also like brought up some like existential drama in me where I was like, I have to do this now. If not now, when?
Right. We could all be gone tomorrow.
Exactly. So I had like no evidence to suggest that I could write a book. So I just started by like writing down the sort of scenes that were in my head, and like I wrote it on the note section on my phone because I felt like that made it less official.
That sounds terrible.
Well, but I was like I didn't want to like admit to myself that I was like starting it in earnest, because in case it didn't pan out, then worst case,
the shame, the writer's shame. I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah. So worst case scenario, it's like I just have this crazy like, document in my note section that if someone finds this, they're gonna like have me committed. But if I don't finish the book, like,
so I assume you're also not sharing this. Like, obviously maybe your husband, but like you're not telling people I'm writing a book because you don't know if it's going to pan out or not.
Yeah, 100%. And I've actually heard other people on your podcast talk about this.
Yeah, I was so embarrassed about
it. I kept it so close. I told my husband, but otherwise I didn't tell anyone until after I had an agent and the book was on submission. That was the point at which I told other people. Yeah. And I didn't even tell, I told like my parents, and then that was it.
Yeah, that's fair, I think. And I think I was probably the exact same way, because there's that fear of like you tell somebody and then like a year later, how's that book coming? Like, I either didn't finish it or it didn't go anywhere, because those are the odds, right? The greatest odds that are that one of those two things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And most writers never finish their book. And even then you don't know, because you could give it to your mother and your mother likes it, but who cares? Kind of. You need that third party independent, meaning an agent, who's taking a chance on you, who's not getting paid until they sell something, to tell you that you're good enough to take on as a client, which is a very rare thing. So once you have that, then you have that validation of like, all right, I guess I'm kind of a writer. because I have an agent. So I think that's fair that you waited until then. Was it
Totally.
how
Yeah.
hard was it for you to find an agent?
Um, I think in the grand scheme of, these stories, because of course it can take like a really long time. I think I was relatively lucky. It still felt incredibly hard to me. And like every time I would get a form rejection or a rejection from that had come from like after a full manuscript request, like it was really hard. Like I would be at the playground with my kids or something, and then I would like put my sunglasses on so no one could see that like my eyes were welling with tears. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's difficult. Now, after having been through that process and also been through the process of publishing one book, I think that I have a much thicker skin. And like that's actually been a helpful thing for me of like now I can take criticism all day long. Like I'm impervious to it, but not impervious, but like it doesn't like,
You
hit me as
understand it's
hard.
part of the game. And
Yeah.
I mean, my agent experience was I did get an agent with my first book, which never sold, but it was 75 rejections and a little bit less than a year to find an agent. I'm like, yeah, that's about, a lot of people are faster than that. A lot of people are a lot slower than that. And it's, if ever, but I did it in the time where you had to mail your query letters. So I'd go to the mailbox and there'd be like envelopes there. And it was like, it's that same feeling of like checking your lottery ticket the night after the Powerball. You're that excitement of like, you have the ticket in your hand. And then immediately when you start, you're like, I didn't win shit.
And was there like, is it like college acceptance where there's like some science with the envelope where you can tell if it's like a certain type of envelope, if it's a rejection or a.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, because the most you would ever kind of get would be, hey, give me 10 pages or something like that. And with my agent, who I'm still with today, who I finally landed, I think she had communicated over email with me that I'm going to take you on as client and then mailed me a contract.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's terrible odds. So congratulations that you got an agent. Then what was the process like when you were on submission? How long did that take? I mean, and you sold your debut, so that's like, or you sold your first book, which isn't remarkable, but it's impressive because a lot of people don't.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like so lucky with how all of it's gone, but it is remarkable to me that like even in kind of like the luckiest, like most successful writer stories, the road is just still paved with like so much rejection. But yeah, I mean, it was, it took me like a few months to find an agent, and then was on submission for several months, and each time like I just got one offer. You know what I mean? It's like I got one agent offer, one publisher offer. That's all you need. But
that's all you need.
People
And they were valid.
not fighting over me.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't had that either. I had like, I'll take whatever I can get, and then you just kind of build from that. But you landed with Amazon, which is a reputable publisher. And to your point earlier, when you get that first read, first look, all of a sudden you've got 5,000 reviews before the book is even launched, which is a little bit, not a realistic scenario for the normal publishing world, in the sense like, normally you have a book, and if you get 500 reviews on Amazon, that's a pretty successful book. But when you have your publisher being the front page of Amazon, it's pretty powerful tool, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's definitely that platform is definitely like a leg up and such good exposure, especially for a debut author. So yeah,
it makes a difference. And did you, when you were on submission with them, or were you, because your upcoming release is also Lake Union, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you sign a 2-book deal, or?
No, they've both been 1-book deals.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's great that they actually, I've talked to some people, they're like, yeah, I sold X thousands of copies. I had 5,000 reviews, but Amazon was a little disappointed and they didn't take my next one. I'm like, yeah, you never know. I've gone through that as well, not with Amazon, but another publisher, where they're like, we love your next work, but your last one didn't sell enough, so we're going to take a pass. I'm like,
oh, it's so hard, like how numbers driven.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense. but the end of that road of the industry is like not a straight line. And,
Yeah.
some people out of the gate are like New York Times bestsellers, and then their next book tanks, and then they're toxic, which is crazy also. Like, why would that, why would somebody be considered toxic just because they had one, middling book? So,
Right.
but other people, it's just a long, slow road, and other people don't sell at all. So it's a pretty brutal industry.
Yeah.
What?
So are your 9 books like spread across a couple different, like you've had the experience of working with a few different publishers?
Yeah, my first publisher went out of business about 6 months after it came out. Second publisher was a UK publisher who didn't want my third book. I was with Ocean View for a couple books, and then I've been with Source Books for the last 5. We just sold the 6, and they've been great because they're very. Source Books is a great company. They're very analytic. They're very engaged. So between Source Books and K Publicity, I've been feeling very taken care of.
That's awesome.
What was your experience like with that first editorial letter? Because that's a harrowing experience. And when you're a debut author, you're just like, wait, what is this? I thought the book was done.
Yeah, I know, totally. That, oh my gosh, that can be so scary. But the developmental editor for my first book, he was absolutely amazing. And
Great.
he was a very seasoned editor, and he just had the gift of making feedback seem complimentary and just like so gentle, even when it was suggesting a pretty big change. And honestly, also I definitely was worried about like, well, what if they suggest something that I don't think I can execute, or what if I disagree with something? That really didn't happen. Everything that was suggested, I was like, that really would be a lot better. Like, wish I thought of it myself. You know what I mean? Like, and it felt really it felt accessible. Like, it felt like, okay, like I see what you mean, and like I think I can do it. And like sometimes it takes a couple days to digest. With my second book, there were a few things where like when I first read the letter, I was like, I can't do that. Like that would change this whole thing, and then you wouldn't have this. But like then the next day, I'm like, I think that actually is a pretty good suggestion. So I feel like it's just it's like it's a long letter. It like needs a little time to let it sink in. But I found the same with the second thing. Like that most of the suggestions, like I could totally see why they would improve the book. And then once you see that, you're like, of course, I'm totally on board. Like, and also I'm such a novice. It's like, I'm not gonna.
Right. Like, of course, these are going to be better ideas than what I had.
Right. Exactly.
I know. Yeah. I had the same feeling. Like, I can't believe you even bought the book.
Exactly. Like, I'll do whatever you think is going to make it better.
But that is the truth of it, is that, and it is hard to get that perspective, because you get this letter and to your point, it's long, and you're furiously trying to read as quickly as possible to like mentally tick off how difficult it's going to be. You're like, I can do that. I can do that. Oh God, a subplot.
Right.
But yeah, when you do reflect on it and you look at it, you're like, okay, well, they did buy my book, so they obviously like it. And because most books they don't buy, and everybody exists in that role to have the same goal, which is to sell as many copies of your book as possible. So there's no sense of like, is this person trying to screw me? Is this there's none of that typical corporate America backstabbing concern. The concern is just that it's a lot of work. And you look at it, you're like, this could take 2 or 3 months of only working on this to get it to where they want. And I think that takes some fortitude to not only accept, but then to actually get excited about, like, I'm looking forward to all this hard work because it's going to make my book better. But I think you have to do that, because otherwise, and you have all the right to say no to all of those suggestions. But I think you're foolish to do that.
Right. And I get kind of manic with tasks. I feel like once I get the letter, it's like I have to stop myself from like trying to make all the changes in one night. You know what I mean? Like I'm like I'm like so excited to tackle it. Like same with like home organization. Honestly, I could like like 3 hours will have gone by and I've just been like in a closet, like reorganizing things. Like so I kind of like those. I kind of like the rushed nature. Not that but like there's a deadline. It's like, okay, and you have like 3 weeks to get this back to us. Like I sort of like that more than when I'm just writing on my own.
Yeah,
schedule.
I'm the same. I'm always early. Yeah, I'm always early to the, and I think sometimes that's a detriment. They always talk about, Stephen King talks about, write your manuscript and let it sit in a drawer for 6 months, which is insanity to me, because once my first draft is done, the next day I'm rewriting it. I'm never giving it time to marinate, to let my thoughts kind of reconfigure themselves around that manuscript. So I'm never really looking at it with a fresh set of eyes. And I think that can be problematic. I don't know if you're able to give yourself a break as you're writing and take some time off and work on something else, but I just want to get it done.
Yeah, no, I'm more like you. I mean, I guess I've had occasions where like something has prevented me from returning to it immediately, whether it be like a portion of summer break when my kids are like not in camp, or
you're
I think
doing editorial edits on this book.
exactly. Yeah. But for the most part, I am definitely more like, let's get this done. And then I'll send it to my agent. And like 5 minutes later, I'm like, I wonder if she's read it yet. Like, no, she has not read it yet. Calm down.
Right. And it's hard because sometimes at that point you kind of hate your book because you've been so close to it and rewritten it so many times. And now you're doing a very challenging, fairly major rewrite from an editorial perspective. And you're just like, I'm already in love with another book that I'm writing. Now I've got to go back to my ex book and try to reconcile
my ex book. That is so funny, but so true. Yeah. You're like, I'm not even thinking about this book anymore.
Well, I've moved on.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to save this relationship?
Oh, that's so funny.
So this book comes out, next Tuesday,
yeah, it
right?
comes out next week. Yeah.
What are your plans around it?
I don't have too many plans. I mean, Amazon, like their big focus is, I think, digital sales.
Of course.
There's less of a brick and mortar bookstore emphasis, so I'm not doing an event at a bookstore. But
that's kind of a touchy thing anyway, right? With Amazon, because a lot of bookstores are like, yeah, we're really trying to not have Amazon published authors doing events because their books aren't in our stores necessarily.
The bookstores in my neighborhood that I've reached out to have all been super kind. They're like, yes, of course we'll carry it. Like,
that's great.
Which is so nice. But I think, I think there definitely is that sentiment rather widely around Amazon titles.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm doing what I can to promote it, but also just sort of like life continues. Like my book will come out on Tuesday. I'll be at work.
Right.
I'll pick my kids up from school, and like that'll pretty much be that.
Right. And it is a weird thing because, you have these expectations of like, especially when you've never done it before, of like a launch. But the reality of it is like it's just another day and it does however it does. And you having some kind of ceremonial launch of it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect anything. And so sometimes when you do events, it's just like almost harder to do events than to not, because you just feel like, is this doing any good? Does it matter?
And I am also so shy, like on the occasions that I've had to, like I've spoken at libraries or gone to like book festivals. I get so nervous that I almost wonder if it's worth the toll on my mental, like, I feel like I don't sleep the night before. I like don't remember what I said afterwards. I'm not nervous right now talking to you because you're easy to talk to and whatever. We're just like on our computers. But in terms of public speaking, that's like not my thing, which I know is weird. People always are like, you're a teacher, but that's
probably because you're talking about yourself.
Yeah.
That's much more difficult, because you feel that shame comes back. And you're like, it's just this silly little book, whatever. Like it is. Like, and same thing with like you were talking about social media. Promoting yourself is a very challenging thing to a lot of authors. And it's this, you have to do it and you have to find the right mix and the right amount. And yes, I teach that stuff. I coach that stuff. And it's,
I could use your help.
A lot of it is just identifying what you like and what you're good at. because it's so obvious when an author is trying too hard or is not trying at all and just putting out stuff that just seems very cursory in their efforts. But everyone's got something that they're good at. Now, it might be creating videos. Whatever it is, you can get yourself out there in a genuine fashion, but everyone thinks they have to do everything, be on every platform, and that's just not true.
Okay, well, I'm glad that's not true, because I downloaded TikTok like a year ago, and I've only been on it like the one time that I downloaded it, but I was like, I don't understand what's happening here, and I don't think I can stay.
Yeah, I know. And it is a little bit too much. And now that you're with K-Publicity, you probably have gotten the your audit of your social media from Haley, who says, like, maybe you should be doing more of this, maybe you should do less of this. And sometimes that's like, and she'll be the first to say, don't try to do everything. But over time, you find the thing that you're most comfortable with that works for you. But I mean, I remember being told, like, you should be posting on Instagram like 2 or 3 times a day. I'm like, fuck that. Like that's not interesting to me. If I have something that I think is interesting, I'll post it. And then as a book starts to come out, sure, you're going to be a little bit more heavy-handed in promoting it. But, most of the time it's pictures of my cat or my dog or my kids. Because who cares?
That's content that I would like to see.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, for me, like, I lean into my newsletter. Like, that's where I put a lot of my effort, and at the expense of doing other stuff. But it's, or doing the podcast or something like that. Do you want to explore, like, public speaking more? Is that something that's, you would, I mean, that is a little weird because you're speaking in front of people every day of your life. Because I think that's a huge benefit to not only writers, but to anybody, is to take public speaking courses and to really put yourself up, because that illuminates so many other parts of your life once you've gone through all that.
I do want to do more of it. I feel like it will get easier with each time. And like, the thing is that I actually don't think I'm that bad at it. It's more like just the nerves that I have are so intense that like, it just makes me rather not. But actually, for Thriller Fest this year, I did volunteer to be a panel, like, facilitator. Sorry, I was blanking on the word.
Like a moderator?
So, yeah, moderator, exactly.
That's a big deal.
I don't know if that will like happen, but I checked that box when I was signing up for Thriller Fest of like willing to be a moderator. So yeah, I think, but actually, to your earlier point, like, that made me feel less nervous, because it's like, that's just talking to other people about their books and asking them questions. I'm like, I have lots of questions. That's not a problem.
And that's also like the hardest part of being a moderator at Thriller Fest or a writers conference is you get the one person on your panel who loves the sound of their own voice, and you've got to really, almost sometimes rudely, cut them off to make sure everyone's having equal time. Because, there's a lot of strong personalities in the writing community. So sometimes that's a little bit of but there's nothing you can do about that. You just deal with it when it comes up. So your process in writing your second book, how did that differ? Was it easier in general, or was it, for me, it was harder because my first book was so terrible and I didn't know what I was doing, that it was I wrote it in 90 days, and I've never done that before or since. And then as I started to like actually learn about how to write, it got a lot harder before it got easier. What was your experience?
Yeah, same for me. It was harder as well. And actually, my book that's coming out next week, that's my second book, is not the second book that I wrote. I wrote a couple in between that we're going to call practice books. But yeah,
but in between your actual book that became your debut.
Yeah.
Oh, so that is interesting. I don't think I've heard that one before.
Yeah, like I wrote, a book, well, because there's a lot of time elapses. It's like you sell the book, but it doesn't come out for a year, a little over a year. So I was still writing that whole time. But yeah, definitely not everything I wrote during that time will ever meet readers, which is fine. Like I really do accept that, like, it's hours of practice. It's like if you're an athlete, like it's not every time you're playing, it's like a game that you're winning. Some of it's practice, some of it's lost games, etc. But it's all like valuable. But I agree with you. Like the first time I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, oh, great. I'm look at me, I'm writing a book. Then once I sort of started to understand the process better, and I think after going through the editing process, working with an editor, it just like illuminated so many things that should be happening. So I think I was harder on myself as I was writing, of just like, this isn't, it was harder to like be okay with having written a bad chapter and just accepting that it was bad. So it took longer, and this, like, coming up with the story was a little bit less organic, I want to say. Like, this just sort of like came to me in bits and pieces, whereas the first one, it was like, I have an idea in my head that I would love to get down on paper. So yeah, it was really different. But I think the ways in which it's getting harder, like, also imply that it's getting better.
100%.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because you're caring. You're caring to learn, and yeah. I think writing is fascinating in the sense that if you're, I don't quite want to say if you're good at it, but if you're dedicated to it and you're committed to it, then you can't half-ass it, which you do with so many other aspects of one's life. So many things in a day job, you could be like, yeah, that's good enough. But when you're writing and you're reading a paragraph and you're editing, and you have that sense of like, it's okay, it's an okay paragraph, it's good enough. You can't just accept that. You have to change it. And that's really difficult to do because you have to be fully present and really committed. And it's fucking exhausting. But there's no other way to do it, because otherwise you're just always going to know that paragraph sucked.
Yeah. And there have been times that like during a round of editing, I'm like, okay, I think this is gonna be the last round. And then I'm ready to show this to someone. And then I'll get to like page 150 and I'm like, oh, it's not the last round of editing, is it? Like, you just keep seeing things and you're like, no, I'm not done.
And that's the other thing that you have to develop, which is, I don't know if you ever fully develop it, but it's always a learning, is knowing when it's done, knowing that you have given it the best that you can do, knowing that it will forever be imperfect, and that it will go to an editor who's got decisions, goes to an agent who's got decisions about it. And because you can't over edit, and you see evidence of that too, where something loses kind of its vibrance because it's just been so whittled down. And that's a hard skill to develop, and it's so personal. You have to it's so only to yourself knowing when that happens. I don't know if you've struggled with that or not.
Oh, definitely. I do not think that I have mastered that like to any degree. But there's so many parts of the process that I feel like I'm really still just figuring it out and feeling it out, and
And then the whole other side of the equation, which is like, now the public has this, and the public is voicing their multitude of opinions about it. And what do I do about that? Do I read my reviews? Do I take them to heart? Do I take it in as just interesting reflections? That's tough, because especially when you have reviews that are just, patently unfair. Even if you're trying to be as objective as possible, you can objectively say, this is just wrong. Especially with the number of reviews on being an Amazon first reads, like do you dig into those at all?
I definitely painted them, but that's where I can also tell, like now with the second book, that I just am not as sensitive as I was with the first, where especially before the book came out, I would read reviews on NetGalley and stuff, and like if there was a bad one, like I would really, it would impact my mood. And like that day I'd be like, why were you in such a bad mood? And then I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's because one person didn't like my book. But I like compare this to having kids. Like with your first kid, like you have the app where it's like, oh, it's the size of an orange, and you're like reading all these books and like getting so prepared. And then with the second kid, you're like, oh crap, my due date's next week, and like we don't have a crib. So it's kind of the same. It's just like
right.
your sensitivity decreases in a good, healthy way.
Yeah.
And so with this book, I'm like so grateful for the positive reviews that people have tagged me in on Instagram, but I am like not laser focused on like stalking reviews. And when I have seen a bad one, I'm like, that is totally fine. Like, I understand why you didn't like it. Like, it's not, So I think that, I mean, you now having written 9 books, like,
so I've got lots of bad reviews. Yeah. I think the only thing that I'm sensitive to, so I don't typically look at them. I like to look at the number of reviews because that's an indication. I will look at so for example, this book is coming out in April. So I'm starting to get reviews on Goodreads. So I'm always curious to see those first early readers who are getting their books off of NetGalley. What do they think? Because you really don't have any idea. And of course you want to pay attention to, trade reviews, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, that kind of a thing. But after the book is out, I don't tend to look too much. The only thing that has ever really bothered me was when people, this is a Goodreads thing, when they leave trigger warnings that are kind of dissonant with the actual content of the book. And I've told this story many times, but I killed a dog in a book, which I know is a thing. I still think you should totally be able to kill whatever you want to kill anytime you want. But the dog, you didn't know this dog. You never met it in the book. It's just 2 police officers. You don't see it happen. It's 2 police officers saying, hey, there was a dead dog in the park. Its throat had been cut. That was the extent of it. And then these Goodreads trigger warnings about cruelty and animal abuse. And then everyone's like, thank God I will never read this book or any other book by this author. Thank you for letting me know. I'm like, come on. It's like, but
it's really unfair. Yeah.
I've decapitated a baby and nobody has said boo, but God forbid there's an animal.
Get very mad about killing dogs. But yeah, this sounds like it was off stage.
It was off camera. Yeah.
It was just people talking about it.
I mean, I get it. I've got my own, I'll read stuff by some of my closest friends and there'll be a scene that's beautifully written, but it might involve, some form of abuse that it's for whatever reason is a trigger for me. And I'm like, I'll skip paragraphs or I'll skip pages, acknowledging that it's good writing and it propels the story. But I'm like, I just don't want that in my head, but I won't stop reading the book. So unless the whole book is about that, but so everyone's different. And I think when you're reading reviews, it's kind of a matter of like, okay, I have put a commodity out there to the world. I want to know what people think because that might inform how I approach future writing. Maybe not. But I think most of the feedback you get from your agent and your editor, that's the really important feedback.
I did notice.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I like when I was reading reviews of my first book, what was interesting to me was that there were like many reviews that said, oh, I really, really liked it until the end. And then the end just fell off the rail and
nobody likes the end.
Ruined the book for me. But then there were just as many that were like, it was a really, really, it was like a slog, but the end saved it. And the end was so good. Like, it just reinforced really how subjective it is. And that, like.
You're hoping for that 60%. If I can make 60% of the readers happy, but endings are always tough because it's funny. And because when I write an ending, it's sublime to me, like whether it's good or not, like it's very emotional. I'm usually crying as I'm writing that last scene because it's hopeful. It's maybe disturbing, whatever, but it's also the end of the book and it's taken me a year to get here. And then people are just like, meh, or I didn't, I'm like, or the review of like, oh, it was a quick and easy read. Like, God damn it, that took me a year to write.
Right. You're like, it wasn't a quick and easy write.
Yeah. So, but without these beautiful readers, we wouldn't exist as writers.
Yeah.
Always eternally grateful. Well, Kathleen, look, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to test your public speaking skills.
Oh, this is the part that I'm so scared of.
Me too.
Actually one time, so a former student of mine has this writing nonprofit company called Cosmic Writers, and they were having like a Zoom to celebrate some milestone that they had hit. But they did something like this where it was like write a story, and I was half on the Zoom, like I was giving my kids dinner, but I wanted to, show my support. So I didn't have like video going. And then my former student cold called me. I heard my name from like across the kitchen. I was horrified. So I like ran over and turned the video on. There were hundreds of people on the Zoom.
Oh my God.
I was like, so then she fed me the line again, and my mind was so blank. And I think eventually I like said something and people salvaged it, but so I have PTSD from the activity, which I fear will make this even more difficult for me. But
well, the good news is there's not 200 people here. This is not live. This can be edited. It will be edited by my producer. And if it's a shit show, that makes it all the much better. But it isn't always an interesting exercise to see kind of where people's brains go, and then the ability to accept one another's premises. Like you might have an idea and somebody goes a different direction. But all right, this is the direction we're going in. So I picked 3 books kind of at random off my bookshelves. I'm going to ask you to pick one of those books. We're going to choose a random page and a random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence. And then that's going to be the first sentence and maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence. You give me 1 or 2 sentences wherever your brain goes. I'll add on, and then we'll call it after a couple minutes. So I've got some interesting books here. And I think I'm actually going to reread this one again. This is The Lost Weekend by Charles Jackson. This is a 1944 book that was kind of hailed as kind of the first major work of fiction about alcoholism. And it was his best known work, and it's amazing, but it's very depressing. Dean Koontz, Odd Thomas, and lovely Clare Mackintosh's The Last Party. So choose one of those.
Oh, tough decision. I'll go with The Last Party. It's been on my to-read list for too long, so maybe this will motivate me to finally read it. I've heard such good things about both her and the... She's wonderful.
She's just so kind and selfless, and will do anything to help another person out, another writer out. And obviously a fantastic writer to boot. Give me a page between 1 and 400.
Okay, 217.
Oh, that's a good one.
Thanks. It felt really good.
It's the beginning of chapter 29. It's mostly dialogue, so let me scan it real quickly. And I usually try to find something that's pretty basic. So I'm just going to go with this one. It's a quote, and you can do whatever you want with it. "You're very kind, Mrs. Morgan."
"I know you weren't expecting us, but I promise we won't overstay."
I look down at the teenager, thinking, I want nothing to do with either of them. Why did they show up at my house? Why do they have bags? I have no time for this, but Southern hospitality dictates I have to let them stay.
"Come on in," I drawled, sounding much more relaxed than I felt. It was then that I saw that one of the men was bleeding.
Blood does a funny thing to me whenever I see it. Most people are repulsed by it. Some people look away immediately. But for some reason, it always appears to me as a magic elixir. I'm fascinated by it. Maybe I want to see more of it. Let me show you upstairs to your room, I told them.
They walked upstairs, and I could hear them whispering. I could hear them rummaging around the bathroom for bandages.
As they were in the bathroom, an idea came over me that was so haunting that I couldn't quite accept it was coming from my own brain. I somehow started to convince myself that they're here to do me harm, and that the only possible way I can avoid it is to be the one who harms first?
Luckily, I've had practice with this. It's been a while, but the body remembers what it's capable of.
I walk to the back of my bedroom and look out the window as they continue doing whatever the hell they're doing in the bathroom. I look down to the bird bath, to the little mound right next to it, the place where I buried 3 pets and 1 body. Nobody knows about any of them. And I'm thinking there might just be enough space for more.
It struck me then how funny it was that they came here thinking this was a safe place, but they don't know me as well as they think they do. Nobody in this town does.
Oh, we call it there. That's great. That's beautiful. She's a problem. That person.
She really changed a lot from the first
right
to the last.
All right. It could have been such a nice little story. She could have baked them cookies.
And she was Southern. I mean, yeah,
right.
It was all like going so pleasantly.
But you get 2 writers like us in there, like, no, there's going to be blood and death almost immediately.
I kept thinking of, I don't know if you're a fan of The Office, but like Michael Scott and his improv, when he just runs in every time and like with a gun and like ruins
right. We're not doing a gun scene. I know. Yeah. Him and his stupid. I've watched The Office in its entirety probably 4 times. It's and that's as your kids get older. That's the type of show that like, oh, let's just watch this together because it's just.
I'm so excited for like that phase of parenting when we want to watch the same thing. I think that'll be great.
It's the best. Or when you experience classic programming through them. Like I remember watching when my kids were maybe like, I don't know, 11 and 13, watching The Sixth Sense. And you know about the twist. And then so like when the twist comes, all I'm doing is watching their faces to see who gets it. And they're having that moment of experiencing that twist for the first time. And it's pretty amazing. It's much more amazing than I expected it to be. It's very almost cathartic to them. So, well, listen, Kathleen, congratulations, not only on your first book, but on your second book, which is out in 1 week. That's very exciting. And, it'll be great to just continue to watch your career and meet you next year at Thriller Fest. I will be there.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you so much. It was so fun chatting with you. Congratulations on your 9th book coming out in April. I'll definitely get a copy.
Thanks.
But yeah, thank you so much. This was so much fun. And yeah, looking forward to meeting you in the spring.
Congrats and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye.
Bye. So there you have it. That is my conversation with Kathleen Willett. I really liked where that story was going. I really liked the idea that, this genteel Southern woman was quietly plotting murder because, hell, why not? If you want to know more about Kathleen, or if you want to buy her new book and anything for a friend, or if you want to even just know about the book, please go to her website, which is KathleenMWillett.com. And while you're on the internet, pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com. You can check out my books, my appearances, my blogs, and you can check out my offerings for coaching. If you're an aspiring writer or an established writer and you're interested in coaching, I encourage you to at least contact me for a free consultation, and we can see if that thing is out. So that's it for now. Friends, thank you, as always, for watching and or listening. It means a lot to me that there are actually people out there listening to this. I do truly appreciate it. I'm always happy to hear feedback, so you can always email me at carterwilson.com and let me know what you think of the show or any guests that you think you wanted to hear on here. More episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, take care.